Speed buses.
Did you put me on?
Yeah, we're on.
No, I don't see you either.
Yeah, you did.
We are on.
Waiting to see Jeff.
I see Jeff. Oh, Leo is Yoda.
Bless you. Excuse me.
Yeah, proper protocol too.
Luckily, I'm wearing a mask.
Your picture is still Yoda.
All right, shall we begin?
I actually didn't see you.
So I'll stay unmuted on Zoom, is that it?
Yes, please.
Okay, lovely. Good evening. We were just in executive session to discuss issues related to collective bargaining or litigation if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining or litigating position of the public body, especially the Medfield Teachers Association, school secretaries, custodians, and cafeteria workers. So at this point, we will open our open meeting. And if we have any public input, I will read the public input statement. And thank you, folks, for joining us this evening. I am smiling. Citizens at this time may address the committee on items of school business not on the agenda. The committee will take such items under advisement without action at the meeting during which the item is presented. Take it in Q&A. And no questions at this point. So I think right now we'll quickly, tonight, if we could just go through the minutes and then we'll start our public forum on grade configuration.
Sure, I can make a motion for approval of the minutes of 6/22 meeting, as well as approval of the minutes that will be held, the executive sessions on 6/29, 7/16, and 7/30.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Second, I'll take a roll call. Jess Riley,
Here, yes.
Leo Brem,
Yes, here.
Tim Knight,
Yes,
Megan Glenn,
Yes.
Anna Mae O'Shea Brooke, yes. All right, lovely. All right.
Guys, just if you could keep your voices up louder, people are finding it hard to hear you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Thank you, everyone
Sorry,
out there.
folks, we'll try a little harder. Thank you.
Louder.
Louder, please. All right, at this time, we are going to open our public forum on the Dale Street School grade configuration decision. So school committee is charged with deciding whether or not we should, the new Dale Street building will be a 3-4-5 building or stay a 4-5 building. At this time, we invited Tim Bonfatti to address the school committee and to lay out the foundations of our public forum this evening. Tim Bonfatti is an alum of school committee. He served, I believe it was 13 years or so, and has served, I believe, on the building committee even longer. And I'm grateful for Tim for his time, his continued service to Medfield and especially to the Medfield schools. So Tim, I will open it up to you.
Okay, thanks, Anna Mae. So I'm here really doing subbing for Mike Quinlan, who's the chairman of the building committee for tonight, who couldn't be around. But so we're going to go over. Lynn, do you want to put the presentation up or?
I just tried to put it up, and Owen, by the way, Larry and Autumn they're not panelists, and either they or I need to be able to share the screen.
She has, I've given her access. I don't see Larry trying to get in, but I've given her access.
Sorry.
Larry
Lynn, can you
Spang
talk?
or Autumn Waldron.
So Lynn, you can now share your screen, and I think we'll look for Larry and Autumn.
Is Larry on the telephone? Is that his phone number there? The 617? Actually, Anna Mae, I'm gonna,
Oh. Well, do you want, is Larry all set? Because he does have a speaking role.
Does.
But
Just
just
get
to
these
let you know,
logistics right, just to make sure we can all hear.
I can.
Yeah, it's important that we also hear
Yes.
this.
So what I would do is increase your volume on, but when you're not, when you're talking to mute it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, only one person in this room should
Yeah.
be not muted at any time.
Yes. Do we have
Um,
Larry?
Anna Mae, actually, there's a comment here that I appreciate, that with masks, the audience can't tell who's speaking. When you answer an audience question, could you please identify yourself first? Thank you. Ironically, that is by an anonymous attendee, which I think we want to make sure that the people who are commenting at any point during the meeting, if you could identify yourself either within the participant list or within your comment. When we do take comments later, that would be very helpful.
Beautiful. Thank you.
So Jessica Riley.
so,
We have Larry now, by any chance?
No.
Thanks.
Can you see my screen? I can't tell if it's showing or not.
Yes, we can see your screen, Lynn.
Okay, great.
well, maybe we should start Anna Mae and then Larry maybe hopefully can join by the time he comes up.
Okay.
I'm hoping. So we're here tonight to kind of go over, really obviously for the benefit of school committee, sort of the thinking that's been developed at the building committee level around the grade configuration issue, whether to go with a grade 4-5 or a 3-4-5. So tonight we're going to look at the educational considerations around the grade configuration issue. Larry's going to talk about the design impacts and how much that grade configuration issue impacts the choice of sites. And then Lynn is going to discuss the financial impact of the two different grade configurations. And we'll go over sort of, these are very preliminary and not really numbers that are necessarily, obviously the town will see more accurate numbers when it's asked to vote on this, but at least it gives some context for the discussions that the school committee is going to have around it. And so the building committee will be taking what the school committee recommends, obviously, into consideration as it makes a decision leading to what's called the preferred schematic report. So Lynn, could you go to the next slide? Yeah. So just for some context around timing and why this is happening now, as you may remember, or certainly those of us who've been involved with it, our plan is to try to bring a project to the town sometime in the spring town meeting calendar schedule. Obviously, that hasn't been decided yet, but that's the general timeline. So in big picture, where this phase of the project concludes in the spring with a concept brought to the town and the funding and the vote on it, the MSBA contribution and the schedule and the phasing impacts and everything. So that's the plan, is spring of 2021. There's an MSBA board meeting that'll occur around that same time frame, approving the project. So that's kind of the big picture. Now, drilling down to the next couple of months. So we have the meeting, the school committee vote on their, sorry about that, is that me? So the school committee vote on the grade configuration is scheduled for August 27th. We're, as the building committee, is voting on the site selection, which will take into account, obviously, the grade configuration on September 9th. And we need to do that in order to be ready for the submission to the MSBA board in October 27th of 2020. So that is the first submission of basically telling the MSBA, this is the project that we're going to advance. The board at the MSBA votes on that in December. The real important meeting, frankly, is that one in November, which is when we get into the nuts and bolts, and we know coming out of that whether they'll support this project moving forward. So that's why we're at this juncture right now, is it relates to timing. Is we need these sort of dominoes to fall into place in order to get to that spring town meeting and ballot initiative that's going to be required for this project. So with that timing of it, the next slides, I believe, are the educational considerations, and I'm going to turn it over to Superintendent Marsden.
Thanks, Tim. So there are definitely some changes. If you look at, tell me that I'm muted here. Some changes based on the configuration that would impact other buildings. So our current grade configuration, Memorial being a pre-K to 1, Wheelock being grades 2 and 3, and Dale Street being a 4 and 5. With that grades 4 and 5 configuration, there is no change. So Memorial, Wheelock, and Dale Street stay with the same grade configurations. However, if we do move to a 3, 4, 5 grade configuration, Memorial becomes a early childhood center of pre-K and K. The first grade moves from Memorial over to Wheelock, making that a 1, 2. And then the new Dale Street Elementary School becomes a 3, 4, 5. Next slide. So looking at the grades 4 and 5 configuration, I think with 3, 4, 5 and 4, 5, there are some advantages and some challenges that we have to discuss. The advantages of the 4, 5, certainly what we talked about in the previous slide, there are no changes to the current grade configuration of Memorial, Wheelock, and Dale Street. We have a smaller student population in that building. 2 grades require a smaller building, which will be much less expensive to build. And then potential to reduce traffic and impact in parking. And again, we've had preliminary traffic analysis done, but we still need more information to go a little bit deeper into that. Some of the challenges with the 4, 5, it doesn't really address the projected enrollment that we have coming in the elementary grades. So we have projections from both MSBA and NESDEC that tell us that we're going to have large groups of kids coming in the next 10 years. However, I will say that based on the projections of both of those organizations for this school year coming up, we have not seen the numbers that they have projected for kindergarten. The challenge of the 4, 5 doesn't allow for us to expand our preschool and our kindergarten programs. So right now we actually have a waiting list for preschool typically, and we can't do all the full day kindergarten we want because we don't have the space. It limits the access to a modern learning environment. So we feel like the more kids in a 3, 4, 5, more Medfield kids would be in a new environment. And then it may accelerate a need for a project at Memorial Wheelock to accommodate that projected growth. And I think that's the big unknown at this point, is that projected growth, because we just haven't seen those numbers that have been projected. Next slide. So the advantage of the 3, 4, 5 configuration supports the projected growth that we're talking about, creates that early childhood center that we think is important at Memorial, allows grades 1 and 2 alignment at Wheelock, allows for future flexibility. We share a lot of staff in Medfield, actually K through 12, so it'll be less traveling for that shared staff. And it allows the students to be part of a school community for more than just 2 years, which Medfield's unique in the sense that there aren't many districts that have a situation or a structure where kids go through all elementary schools in all their years. Many communities have the neighborhood schools. I can think of just a couple right now, Hopkinton and Holliston, that share the same sort of model that we have in Medfield. Better vertical alignment and curriculum planning in the 3, 4, 5, and more opportunities for targeted special education programs, and certainly allows for more creative scheduling as we look at specials in the curriculum. So some of the challenges with the 3, 4, 5, it definitely will be a larger building and might be much more expensive. Requires a realignment of all 3 elementary schools. As we said in that first slide, it changes what it looks like at both Memorial and Wheelock. Creates a larger student population in one building, although we've tried to address that with the design. Our Street's been great with designing pods and learning clusters for us to try to make that small school feel. And then changes to the current grade configuration will certainly require additional planning as we are moving grades from building to building. Next slide.
So I'm going to try to speak for Larry because I don't think he's on yet, but these are the alternatives that we looked at. Am I echoing? I'm sorry. But the alternatives across the top are the base repair that's required to be looked at by MSBA. It's does not meet the educational program requirement. However, we are required to look at it from a baseline perspective. Alternatives B1 and B2 are add addition renovations to the existing school. This would require that it be done in phases and students to be moved multiple times in order to accommodate an add renovation. And then alternates E1 and E1.3 are two potential design options for a grades 4 through 5, as well as alternate E2 and E2.3 for the grade 3 through 5 grade configuration. These are the two design alternatives that we looked at for the Wheelock site, both from a grades 4 through 5 perspective and a grades 3 through 5 perspective as well. This is a quick overview of what we've been doing in terms of seeing what would fit on both the Dale Street School site and the Wheelock Street School site.
Yeah, I just would add to that before, since Larry's not here, because we've talked about this, that largely the decision around grade configuration doesn't impact in sort of a really determinative way what site we would go to. The Dale Street site being a smaller site obviously gets more crowded with the bigger school, but as you can see, it does work in that scenario. And Wheelock, we're looking at sort of the traffic, which is difficult to do now given COVID-19 since we don't have a baseline, but we have possible ideas for traffic mitigation related to South Street there, if on either the 4-5, either adding the 4-5 or 3-4-5. So the big takeaway of this is that it's probably not particularly determinative to the building committee in terms of site selection. The grade configurations are fairly neutral. Sorry.
Yes, and as we go into financials, I'll say the same thing, that the cost differentiation between the two is really more based on the size, whether it's a grade 4 through 5 or a grade 3 through 5. There's not much difference between the two sites, except for the fact that the Wheelock site is a little bit bigger in size.
Lynn, sorry, before you move on to those site selections, in previous Dale Street, the school Dale Street project meetings, I've asked before, if we decide to go with a 4-5, could an additional grade be added later down the line? Can you share the response for that?
If we added an additional grade level to the grades 4 through 5 school, the common spaces such as the cafeteria, library, and those sorts of spaces would be undersized for an additional grade level, which would mean additional lunches in order to accommodate the school population. And as you can see on the Dell Street School site, there's very little room to add. In all of these schemes, to go from a grades 4 through 5 to a grades 3 through 5 grade configuration, we've gone vertically to accomplish that change in grade levels. And so to get to the question, to the financials that I'm sure everybody's been waiting to see, is we looked at, we had two estimators go through the estimating process throughout the month of July. We had PM&C and another independent estimator, AM Fogarty, go through and work with Arrow Street to end up with the estimates that we received from both of them. We went through a cost reconciliation process on July 31st, trying to make sure that they had covered the entire scope and to make sure that both estimators understood what the scope of each of the alternatives were. What you see here on the screen is a cost range, and this cost range, let me just first say that these costs are here for comparative purposes. We're very early in the design process, and these numbers will tighten up as we go through the process and actually get into more detail on the design as we move forward. But these are good numbers based on, for comparative purposes. The cost range that you see here are for the two construction delivery methods, either the design bid build delivery method or the construction manager at risk delivery method. The lower range is the design bid build, which is a little bit less costly than the construction manager at risk. Typically, the construction manager at risk, where you would want to use a construction manager, would be on very complex phased costs, projects where you could accelerate schedule in order to make up for the higher cost of a construction manager. So that explains the cost range for each of those. But as you can see here, there's the base repair is the lower end of the cost range. And again, this is not addressing any of the educational requirements. It's just basically upgrading the building systems and upgrading to code. We have the cost range for addition renovation to the existing Dale Street School, both for the grade 4 through 5 and the grade 3 through 5 configuration. We have the estimated construction cost and then a column for the estimated project cost. The estimated project costs are running about 26% of the hard construction costs. Same for both Dell Street and Wheelock. We have costs for new construction for the grades 4 through 5 configuration and grade 3 through 5 configuration. As you can see here, the primary difference between the grade configurations is approximately $10 to $14 million. So the grades 3 through 5 configuration would be that much more than the grades 4 through 5. And taking these numbers and moving forward with them to try to give you an idea of what the tax impact would be based on this range of costs.
You want her to pause for a second?
Yeah, just one.
Tim, you want to say your name so that people know who's speaking?
It's tonight. I'm on mute anyways.
Yeah.
The only thing maybe I'm misreading it. There's a big reasonable difference in cost based on sites. I'm not reading that.
You want to go back up, Lynn, please?
Dale Street, 80 to 91, and 35. Wheelock, 90 to 99. I don't need.
She can't hear you.
I can't hear.
Go right to your microphone because you probably don't hear you.
I'm talking to your mic.
Talking about Mike.
This mic.
Yeah.
Yeah, Lynn, can you hear me? It's Ethan Knight.
I can hear you now. I couldn't hear you before. I'm sorry.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm just between Dale and Wheelock, there's a difference in cost. And I either haven't caught that or I'm misreading it. If I look at the 3 through 5 Dale versus 3 through 5 Wheelock, there's a reasonable difference in cost. What's the high level explanation?
Oh, the difference in 3 through 5 or 4 through 5 from Dale Street to Wheelock, is that what you're asking? It's primarily has to do with the size of the site. We're developing more of the site on Wheelock than Dale. We have been looking at those numbers and working with the estimators to try to make them more apples to apples so that we're comparing, we're doing the same amount of site development on Dell as on Wheelock. We're still working through that to try to get these numbers closer for comparison purposes. But right now, the primary difference between the two is the size of the site and the amount of developed land.
Lynn, I have one other question about that. I
Yes,
attended the meeting, let me mute myself, sorry. I attended the meeting by Zoom last night for the Dale Street project, and I think I'm curious, one of the things we had talked about with the site, or one of the things you guys talked about with the site, was that there would be some level of road construction that was needed for that access road that comes through. If we were to go with the 4-5, but Wheelock were to need a major renovation in the next, 10 to 20 years, would, in your opinion, and you may not know this or not, is that work that we would have to do anyway in order to bring Wheelock up? So if we were to not use the Wheelock site, would we have to do that work on the access road to be able to bring Wheelock up to kind of the amount of students it would need to handle, the amount of utilities, the amount of access? So essentially, would it end up being a sunk cost within a Wheelock renovation 10 to 20
think-
years from now?
Yeah, I think the new water line that's being proposed to the
Hold on, hold
Wheelock
on, hold on.
site.
I just have to turn up my volume to hear you. Thanks, appreciate it.
Okay. I think the new water line that is carried in these costs for the Wheelock site would be required if you increase capacity on the Wheelock property. I also think that you currently have issues there in terms of traffic and movement of cars and buses. So at some point, if you were going to replace or revitalize or renovate Wheelock, I think you would be addressing those issues as well.
So potentially, let me turn this off. Oh, golly. Potentially, we would be sinking construction costs now in 2021, 2022 numbers, as opposed to much higher, conceivably, construction costs in, say, 2032, 2039, somewhere in there. So there is a real, if we're looking at the long range, there's a real potential that we could be spending a great deal less for improvements that would not need to happen eventually anyway, and
Yes,
having
and
folded into this cost.
And
I
I
mean, we
will
can't
say,
tell the future, obviously, but it seems
I
to me
will
that that could be a better long-term view.
right, and I will say that it looks as if we just finished a market study and it, in regards to what the escalation rates we're going to do over the next year and a half. And it looks like the time frame for when Dell Street will be bidding will be on the downturn of the market. Right now, the market's kind of holding, but they expect in about 6 to 8 months that the escalation will be down to about 1 to 1.5%. But by the end of next year, it could be flat or lower. And I think that by the time frame where we expect to bid this project, we may be at the bottom of the curve. So that's good news
Yeah, that's about
we
the
see-
first good, bad news I've heard in a long time.
I know.
Thank you, appreciate it, Lynn.
Is there any other questions on these before we go back to the tax impact slide? And I can't, the way I'm sharing
Lynn,
the
were you
screen.
gonna review some of the other costs, the supplemental costs as well?
I don't have that in this presentation. I can, the presentation from last night was a little bit more in depth in terms of the breakdown of costs.
Maybe just to, so these costs are really should be looked at sort of relative to each other. They're not, and really around, the idea was to look at it in terms of the grade configuration. We have a lot of work to do on these costs as a building committee before we vote, even in that September meeting, because I think Lynn alluded to it, there's a lot of site development in the Wheelock site that we need to decide, is it the right move to do that now? Is it necessary? Is it is it a like to have, or is it a need to have? So I'm just, I guess, Leo, I'm just careful. I just think we should be careful about getting too far into the cost because they're fairly evolving. They're good for a relative purpose, but I think that by the time we vote in September, we'll have better information and can talk more intelligently about it. And by the time we vote or ask the town to vote in the spring, obviously we'll have even that much better information. So I wouldn't get into a long discussion about these costs because the building committee still needs to sort out. There's about $2 million in the Wheelock numbers related to improvements to the Wheelock traffic circulation, which may or may not be necessary if a new Dale was put behind it. So those are things that you just got work to do, and we have a few weeks to get it done.
I can run down the list without really getting into the weeds, just so you know some of the alternatives that we're looking at. We're looking at various HVAC options, from electric boilers in lieu of gas boilers, geothermal HVAC system, and a VRF system for the HVAC. Then we're looking at the costs for demolishing a portion to all of the Dell Street, existing Dell Street School. And we're also looking at offsite baseball field replacement because we're going to be displacing one at the Dell Street School. And we're looking at irrigation of softball fields and other fields, as well as the cost to replace the water main down Elm Street. And we're looking at costs for traffic signaling at the corner of South Street and Elm Street. And also we're looking at the costs for mothballing a portion or all of the existing Dell Street School, as well as abating the school. So, and then costs for how many fields we may be adding or displacing on the Wheelock site. So we're looking at costs for all of those things and how we might put this menu together to get to the right solution.
Thank you.
So in terms of tax impact for the grade 4 through 5 options, which has a range of 53 million to 59 million in terms of the town's share of the project costs, the tax impact for the average home, which is a $675,000 home, is $817 to $911. And for the grades 3 through 5 options, that range for town share is $66 to $70 million, with the estimated tax impact of $1,017 to $1,077. So this gives us a differential of $11 to $13 million between the two grade configuration options, which is an impact of $166 to $200 on the average homeowner.
Which would be in, which would be in today's dollars with today's construction costs, as opposed to what we might need to do in the future, looking at how we would reconfigure grades and over the long term of the debt. So actually, Lynn, can you remind me how long we would take this debt out for, how long this would be?
We've been looking at 20 to 25 and
Okay.
30-year bonds, but these numbers are based on 30-year bonds.
Okay, and we also have a great deal of debt rolling off the books in a couple of years. I'm not actually advocating one way or another right now for this, but I do want to kind of understand I want to understand kind of the interplay of our current debt and what we need to think about in terms of long-term good for the town, and not being short-sighted around our expenses now because it feels hard. So I want to make sure that I have the whole picture. I'm not really advocating one way or another right now, because most of what this is really a town decision. And
These
we're here to
costs-
discuss educational decisions tonight, but I do think that it's important that people understand kind of the range.
These costs probably wouldn't hit the people's taxes
Oh, Lynn.
until probably late 2023 to 2024.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that again?
These tax increases would probably not hit till probably around 2024, actually, because we're looking at now opening the building in the fall of 2024.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Does anybody else have any questions?
Should we answer some of these financial questions so we don't get,
I think we'll come back to the questions.
do we want to, some of them have been answered, and I kind of want to make sure that people understand that, so we can just get through this section?
Yeah, I
Quickly?
think if we finish the presentation and
Okay.
then go to Q&A, I think that that would be a good way to go.
Okay.
All right,
So
so
the-
next steps. So today we're really, as I said at the beginning, school committee is charged to decide the grade configuration. So tonight is about getting greater clarity and also reviewing the latest cost estimates. I know we are charged with the educational plan, but it's good to put context because our decisions have ramifications into the size of the building, the cost, etc. So we are, and I think Lynn's got another slide later, but so we will vote on the 27th, and then also the school building committee will vote on a preferred scheme and site on September 9th. And on the 15th of September, the Board of Select People will vote to authorize submission of preferred schematic to the MSBA. And our goal is, and Lynn will perhaps, you'll reiterate, but I'll just say it now. Our goal is that people will give us the feedback we need because we are voting on the 27th. And we invite everyone to reach out to us to email scchair@email.medfield.net. And so there it is, and we'll show that again at the end. But I think Dr. Marsden wanted to say a few words before we open it up to Q&A.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As have you been following this project for it seems like forever we've been working on this. One of the things that we've really discussed at a lot was the grade configuration. I've certainly been a proponent of having 3, 4, 5. Looking at the projected growth in town, looking at what we need for space and educationally and what we wrote in the educational plan, that's been something that I've been really in favor of, the 3, 4, 5. However, after looking at the financials and really taking a look at where we are financially in this country, in this town, and post COVID-19, I'm beginning to think a little bit and wondering if we have the both capacity and appetite in the community to have a $14 million extra onto a building. And I think that concerns me a little bit. I'm not sure that it's the right time to do a $14 million premium on a building. So I think I've really been thinking a lot about this for months now, and really the last couple of weeks once we got additional financials. I'm going to change my recommendation, which has always been a 3, 4, 5. I'm going to change that to a 4, 5. It doesn't mean or doesn't impact what you folks do. It's your decision to do that. But looking at it from a perspective and as superintendent and making sure that a project gets done, my thoughts now are switching to a 4, 5 configuration instead of a 3, 4, 5. As you know, there are 3 signatures that go on these documents. There's the chair of the school committee, the chair of the board of selectmen, and the superintendent of schools. So if the town boards decide something different than what I recommend, I'm fine with that. I'm okay with that. However, I don't know if we have the capacity or the appetite in this community going forward for 3, 4, 5. So I will change my recommendation to a 4, 5 going forward. And whatever the boards decide, I will certainly go along with once we submit the documents.
Okay. So Dr. Marsden, in terms of if we did go the 4-5, do you believe that our educational priorities can still be fulfilled in the 4-5 building?
Absolutely. I wouldn't make that recommendation if I didn't think so. I think based on the numbers that I'm seeing in a 575 4-5 building, a 575 student 4-5 building, that will still give us obviously a modern learning that all of our kids will go through. It'll give us the space that we need going forward for at least a few years. We just don't have that crystal ball. And that's the frustrating piece, is that we're making a lot of decisions on projections that we don't know if they're actually going to come true or not. And right now they haven't. So I don't think I'd be making this recommendation if I saw the 235 kids coming in the door of kindergarten this year. But we didn't see it last year. We're not seeing it this year. So it doesn't mean we're not going to see it the year after that. But I think that, if we're looking at a building that is holding, it's built for 575 in 2 grades, with the information we have now, I absolutely think we can do it. Do I always think that long-term for the community and long after we're all out of here, a 3, 4, 5 is better? Sure. I just don't know whether or not we have the appetite to do that in this community right now.
Understood.
Dr. Marsden, do we still have space issues at Memorial School?
Yeah, I think we'll probably still be in a situation at some point in the next 5 years to add modular classrooms. Part of our issues around space at Memorial is that it was built and expanded when we weren't doing full day kindergarten. So, we switched to that 6 years ago, and I can't imagine ever switching back, quite frankly. But that some of that is self-imposed, our issues over there with space, because it was built for one thing and we put a different program in there. So that's part of it. So if push came to shove and we had to go back to half day, we could do that. I would never want to do that educationally. But my suggestion would be, going forward, if we start to run into some of these issues with space, that we add modular buildings like the town did many years ago to Dale Street. And MAP has one behind Memorial now and behind Wheelock. So we would do something like that as a stopgap measure. Certainly it's not $14 million to add that. We could do that. And we could certainly, I would think we'd take the preschool out of Memorial first and make it into its own separate modular, behind Memorial or the side of Memorial at some point. But I think, Leo, to your question, if the numbers do come through like they're projected, absolutely we will.
If you were to consider the Wheelock site, 10 years from now, as Jess was mentioning, Lynn and the rest of and Tim, should we expect that 10 to 15 years from now, we would have building costs be about the same as today, or would they be a little higher, you think?
It would be significantly
That a-
higher.
Is that
Rhetorical question, Leo? Or,
Well, I guess I'll tell that story because, in my experience, in Sharon Middle School, which I spoke of a couple of times, that was a project that didn't pass the first time it went through. And then 5 years later, they decided to go back again. And because it was over the prerequisite time, they had to redesign the school. And that went from a $26 million project to a $47 million project in 5 years. And so I guess I'm hesitant, and I understand the times are unprecedented. And where we are, I guess I would hate to be here 5 years from now with space problems after we just opened a brand new elementary school. And I guess that's the consideration I think we just want to think about.
Yeah, agreed.
for me, I think one of my concerns is that there are a lot of positives to having as many of our kids grouped together in the same space, in the same physical campus. And while we can talk about modulars and this, that, and kind of intermediate kinds of solutions, I think that that's also, and I've spoken of this many times in this meeting and in also other contexts, we kick the can down the road a lot. And I understand, I hate this virus. And in fact, if anybody wants to know who's speaking, it's me, Jess Riley, and I'm behind a mask. But this virus is not going to last forever. There may be other viruses. Hopefully we have come to the point where we understand what to do when that does happen. But much to the point of educational, rather than town costs, I feel like there are so many benefits to having more kids in one campus, with the ability to share resources, with the ability for kids in Wheelock, if that should be where we go, to share kind of what would be more modern and well-developed specialties kind of areas. I mean, there's a lot of potential for us to be able to kind of move back and forth. And we do share specialists a great deal. And the, there are going to be future kind of concerns around staff retention. If we're continuing to kind of have specialists all over the place, it would be, there's a lot of, I can't think we can assume that our numbers are going to plummet over the long term. They may vary, but they will not go away. And one of the reasons that I came on to school committee in the first place is because I truly believe in our system. And I also truly believe that we need to be thinking long-term about our town. And I know that we don't have an appetite for it right now. It's been a horrible 5 months, personally, town-wise, and previous to that point, we were looking at a town that was having some major financial problems when the world is supposed to be rosy. I understand all of those things, but one of the reasons that we do is that we do not think long-term. And I look at this shiny new school, right? We're gonna get a new school, but we have 4 other aging buildings. And much to Mike Marcucci's point, how much less will it cost us even 10 years down the road when many of us who are watching and many of us who are here will continue to be here, to be able to go down to 2 campuses if we need to, if indeed we do not get these populations. It's not like we are going to fill the classrooms with teachers whether we need them or not. It's not like we will be using those resources whether we need them or not. We will need these, and we will need a modern building in which to do it. And the more kids that we can get in a modern building, in a building that has air conditioning and better HVAC at a time in which our climate is changing at an incredibly rapid rate, at a time where we are looking and begging for more community space, I really have great hesitancy to say, and I would have to have a very long think about whether I could recommend as a 4-5 as opposed to a 3-4-5. $14 million is a lot of money, but over 30 years with other debt rolling off the books, I think that becomes a little bit of simply an argument around change and not change, which is one of the things that happens to Medfield a lot.
You know what, Jess, I really respect what you're saying, and I was totally 110% on board with that. This is Anna Mae O'Shea Brooks speaking. And, I decided to join this project because I really wanted to move this forward. I truly believed in the 3-4-5. And then I see these numbers, and then I realize that every home in Medfield has been impacted in some shape or form. And so I can't go in thinking just education, because yes, it is that, and we are tasked for that, but I have to consider how households are being impacted. So I'm going to have a great long think. I'm really hoping that people will give us their feedback. But, it's just very hard for me to digest, especially now that we've seen those numbers as a cost per household and what people can digest. And so again, I'm glad we're having this discussion right now, because this is just, this is allowing me to also process, and I can't stress enough that we really want to hear from the public. And so please reach out to us. But what I would love right now is Tim Bonfatti, would you be able to, Leo gave a little history about Sharon High School, and I believe that you've got some historical information about our high school, and just what is your perspective? Because you do this as a living, Tim, and you've been in the Medfield community for so long. So I'd really love to hear your perspective.
Okay, I'll give it to you then. So, the Dale Street School project, am I echoing? Is that all right? The Dale Street School project has been something that we've looked at for over 20 years. The first planning on it occurred in the 90s, and it's been on the list of town needs for quite, like I said, 20 years at least, minimum. And pre-COVID-19, much like what Dr. Marsden said and what you said, Anna Mae, and others, I have felt that we should be looking much more forward around this, and there were compelling reasons around the bigger school, the grades 3, 4, 5, and I felt the town was in a shape, although compared to other towns, frankly, this tax impact is more significant than some similar projects we have for even the 4, 5, not just the 3, 4, 5. And, I felt that strongly that it was probably the way to go when it was developing. When I look at some of the communities we work in, and we're working in like 6 or 7 similar communities right now, I'm hearing more and more from people about concern about their town's impact, their town's appetite for these kinds of tax increases. That they're all dealing with not just new schools, which some people might say, in a time of economic stress is a luxury versus, say, having to do an override around teachers and police and fire, which some towns are looking at. Many people are now nervous. We haven't had, in the 10 years of my business's history, we haven't had a project not pass an override. And I've had 2 chairmen come up to me and express concern about their town's appetite for a project. So COVID-19 changed things because unfortunately, we can't predict. I mean, Lynn touched on it a little bit about when she said that construction costs are going down, or could potentially go down in 2021. That's a sentiment that many people share, but we don't know. But what it does say is the people that she's talking to believe that the economy is not going to recover quickly, because that's why those costs are going down. That's not, and no, it's a great thing from a buyer standpoint, but it's not a great thing from the overall economy. So if what the decision we're making now in September, we're going to have to live with come the spring, and because that's how this thing progresses. And I am very concerned, given the already considerable tax increase we'd be asking for, that people would say, we know that we needed to replace Dale, but instead of just replacing Dale, you've added on another grade at a time when we really can't afford to add on another grade. So, I've come around mostly around after the living with this economic consequences of this pandemic, the fear that's out there. I've kind of come around where I think we should be going to the town with what we need. And unfortunately, and I've always been a proponent of thinking out long-term, but sometimes, you've got to get what you feel you can get. And I'm not sure that we would succeed with that bigger school. I think that there's community of people out there that are in town now that would say that's you took a problem and created an opportunity for yourself that you didn't need to do, and made another problem. So that's kind of where I'm coming down, is that we've got to make a decision that we're going to have to live with 6 months from now when we go in front of the town. And the argument to say, we did what we set out to do even 20 years ago, and that is replace Dale Street, is why we're coming to you right now. And so that's my opinion. It's, I'm definitely strongly leaning that way when we get to make that decision on the building committee.
You know, I understand both of your points. But when I hear we have to live with ourselves 6 months from now, I think I have to live with myself 10 years from now, 20 years from now. And I have heard, again, I am not saying in one way or another I've made a decision. But in terms of arguing the other side, I have heard this discussion and this, we can't afford this now discussion multiple times in the almost 20 years that I've lived in Medfield. And we live with the consequences of that every day. When we didn't believe that we could afford to ever offer full-day kindergarten at Memorial, that was when we decided to build a smaller school. And yet here we are, 20 years later, busting at the seams and wanting to offer the best education and the most educational opportunities while being able, at this point at least, to make revenue off of that and having to decrease that. Now, I can't say that the state will at some point just mandate full-day kindergarten, and we'll have to eat that. It's going to make it a lot easier to eat that if we have the space to do it. And I need to make sure that people understand that I feel how frightened and desperate these times are, but sometimes you just have to be a little bit braver than you think you can be and commit to the future of your town, to the future of the people who live here, even if you aren't here. And we have to think very deeply about this, very deeply. We can't just roll over and say, yeah, I know, we didn't expect a pandemic. Nobody expects a pandemic. It's horrible and it will take a while. But these are costs that perhaps will take a while and start to feel even just a little bit more reasonable, especially when we look at the kind of differential between what 14 million looks like over 30 years. My concern also is that eventually, by not doing this, we will end up instilling the same costs on each household in the same time frame by looking at, all right, how do we add $500,000 each modulars in 5 years? How do we do this? How do we do that? And it's poorer project, poorer facilities for a longer time. And it's kind of continuing to stick your finger in the leaks. And that is a very long-term problem in Medfield. We have many other problems in terms of revenue, and we need to work on those. But as a member of the townwide master plan and looking at what we have done in the past and having pretty good understanding of that and what we hope to achieve in the future, I think sometimes we really have to not look at this, what conceivably be 4 years of really bad, right? Because in year 5, 6, 7, and 8, it could conceivably get worse for us because we haven't spent this money now. And it's an awful decision. Most of the decisions we've had to make in the last 5 months have been horrible. Very few good ones out there. But sometimes, if I can be so pretentious, you have to, screw your courage to the sticking point and say that this is our gift out of this horrible time to the hope for our future and to the long-term financial health of the town, even though it may not feel like it right now. And the reason I'm so passionate about that is because these are things I have looked at for a long time. And if they were easy, we would have already done them. So I rest my case for right now, and I'd be very happy to have us go to questions, but I really feel like we're exhausted, but we can't be exhausted for the kids who come 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, because we will be in the same position in 10 years, looking at projection, looking at construction costs and feeling like we're gonna have to cheap it out. So that is my,
Before we go to questions, I have one more comment and one more short story. Just a comment, as I want to echo the concern of the economic situation that we may be in the next 24 months, 36 months. And, you know, coming through my post-college years, through 2 major recessions, we always seem to come out on the other side pretty well and still be faced with the same struggles that we had, you know, in education before we went in. So it's always a constant push forward. And I will tell one last Sharon story, and I promise this will be the last one. But Tim Bonfatti and I both worked before we knew each other on the Sharon High School project. Not the middle school project anyway, but the high school project 24 years ago. It was I believe it was $13 million project, Tim, you can correct me if I'm wrong, where they renovated the high school. And they took the cheaper project. They will be tearing that high school down next year in less than 24 years of spending that 12 million, including the brand new wing that my first year or second year in education was able to open up a new technology center. So that project is being torn down already. So I kind of consider that $14 million kind of thrown out the window, or $13 million thrown out the window if it doesn't last more than 30, 40. And what the MSBA has asked us to do is build a building that will last 50 years for the town of Medfield. And that was repeated over and over again in that meeting, MSBA. So I understand, and I am hopeful that if we end up with a 4-5 building, it'll be a beautiful 4-5 building. And I will hope that no more children than we can handle move into town, so that we can keep the class sizes where they need to be and have enough space to conduct the programming we'd like. So and I'll leave it at that and open it for questions.
Okay, I have a number of questions in the Q&A. If you want me to read them, I can read them and we can respond to them. The first one comes from.
Do you want to read them?
Yeah, you know what, Lynn?
Lynn, yeah.
How about I read them and you help answer whomever, either you or Jeff or Tim Bonfatti or so.
Sure, go ahead.
Thank
And I
you.
gotta say, Lynn, this is only 14 questions. The last meeting
Yeah.
had this beat by far.
This is for lightweights.
Yeah.
All right, so the first one, oh, and I see a Renee, but I don't see a last name. So Renee, if you can type in your last name in the bottom so I can read your question. So the first one is Chris McHugh Potts, but doesn't MSBA require space for expansion? I think that was asked when I asked you, can we add another grade later to a building?
Yes, MSBA requires that we provide space for a 15% expansion, but that 15% expansion really wouldn't accommodate a full grade level. And the 15% expansion is sort of built in. That amount, the actual common spaces and the sizes that we're allowed to use for the common spaces could accommodate a 15% expansion, but wouldn't accommodate a full grade level. And I think Larry joined, so Larry may want to add more to that.
Yeah, good evening, everyone, and so sorry to be late. I had in my calendar that we were starting at 7, so I was shocked to see that you had gotten through everything.
That was pre-COVID. Everything's earlier now.
Yeah, my apologies.
Sorry, Larry, but you're here, so that's good. All right. Next question is,
It is Renee Howley.
okay, Renee Howley, thank you. Can we have data on what cost it is to take Dale down? And this is added cost, not in the scenarios.
Larry, I have those in front of me if you want me to.
I was going to say,
Yes.
it would take a minute to look it up, but if you have it handy.
Okay, the cost to take down the additions to the 1941 building is $1,394,000. $1,351. And to take down the 1941 building is $1,796 and $896. That's for the entire building.
Okay.
And that is if we choose not, if the town itself, once that becomes no longer a school building, if the town itself decides to take down those parts. Kind of depending on
Right.
what the town decides to do, which is kind of where the mothball costs come as well, that there's kind of a
Right.
resting period where we could mothball it and stabilize it and not have to worry about it right away.
Right, and Larry, you may want to speak to that because you had talked about the DCAM protocols for mothballing a building, and that's what we based the cost estimating on.
Sure, yeah, the sort of base schemes we looked at in all cases was to take off the cafeteria and classroom wing. And those costs that Lynn mentioned were to take down the classroom piece, the 2-story classrooms, as well as a subsequent take down the full piece. We did price out based on a DCAM approach to mothballing a building, and it's sort of thinking about it in a 3 to 5 and beyond time frame of putting plywood on the windows, setting up the building systems for long-term preservation without necessarily using the building. So we use that as protocol when we could talk through if folks decided that was a route to go, we could talk through and determine what costs are appropriate.
And again, doing a portion of the building would be $910,000 to mothball, and doing the entire building would be $1,311,076 for mothballing the entire building.
All right, and the next question, I think you answered it, but maybe just run through it, is why is the Wheelock site higher cost?
Yes, we answered that question by saying that the Wheelock site is a larger site and has a larger site development. We also talked about some of the other factors that weigh in for Wheelock that we don't have for Dale, and that would be the extension of the water main and also revamping the entire traffic configuration to serve both Wheelock and the new school. Larry, if you want to add more to that.
Yeah, and there was a component of the costs associated with the Wheelock site of doing some improvements to the entryway and parking in front of the existing Wheelock that would improve traffic, improve parking, improve bus drop off. So there was quite a few dollars there, and I can look that up, but we presented that last night and went through it with folks at the SBC meeting.
Thank you. A question from Chris McHugh Potts. The 10 to 14 million premium doesn't reflect differences in the chart between 3 and 5 and 4 and 5, which near 20 million in some cases.
The chart, first of all, shows the range from design bid build to construction manager at risk. So we're concentrating on the design bid build portion because it doesn't look like it looks like that's the delivery method that we may proceed with based on the timing of the project and when we're going to be able to go out to bid for it. It doesn't look like we're going to be able to utilize fast tracking the project with early bid packages. So the premium for a CM at risk doesn't appear to be necessary at this point in time. But so if you take the lower range of those numbers shown, the cost range should be in that, is it 10 or 11 to $14 million?
I think the difference really though, Lynn, I think what Chris is getting at is the one slide on the tax impact is the town share, and the other slide is the total project cost. So the MSBA is reimbursing some of the difference between 3.5 and 4.5, right?
Right. No, I think she was referring to the chart where we have the range for each alternative, and the range represents the two delivery methods. And if you take the higher end, it's going to be a higher range.
Okay. And another question from Chris, and long range, we need to shoulder Dale Street repurpose cost. Please don't ignore that. Okay. And for Megan Sullivan, you were saying this is great, a great configuration discussion, but isn't it really about how many classrooms Medfield will have to work with? How many additional classrooms will there be in the 3-5 versus the 4-5 configuration? Dr. Marsden?
Yeah, so we were looking at the 3, 4, 5, increasing 39 classrooms in the 4, 5, 26 classrooms.
Increasing or in total?
I'm sorry, not increasing. There will be 39 freestanding classrooms in the 3, 4, 5, not including art, music, special education, library, those types of spaces, science rooms. And there'll be 26 in the 4, 5.
So 13 different.
13 per grade.
additional classrooms.
Lynn, can you please pull up the cost per taxpayer again, please? And then this is from Bant Lega. Is the tax impact in total or per year?
My understanding is that that would be per year.
That is correct?
Yes.
Okay, and then the second one for the anonymous. Megan Sullivan, with the Wheelock project somewhere in the future, can that project add more classrooms and get a three grade solution at that site? Is that a Lynn, Larry, Tim Bonfatti question?
I think that if you were to build on the Wheelock site and only do a 2-grade configuration, you've kind of landlocked the existing Wheelock school a little bit. So it would be somewhat difficult to try to fit a 3-grade school in place of the existing Wheelock.
There's
Yeah,
also student movement problems, right? Flow and how you educate kids in a building that is under control or under construction, because we wouldn't be able to necessarily move them out. It's one of the things that we look at in terms of renovating Dale as opposed to simply building a new building. Am I looking at that correctly, that issue?
Yeah, I would simply add that we haven't studied that scenario. It's an interesting one that we may want to look at. But the buildings, as you see with our studies with Dale Street, the elementary schools of today, if you were to build it, are larger than the elementary schools that were built, so let's say for Wheelock's timeframe. So the building itself would get larger, and then of course more grades would add additional space. The site is large, so it's possible that it could fit a 3-grade versus a 2-grade if it went that direction. But to your point, unless there were swing space available, the students would have to be in that building while it got constructed around them.
And if we're even thinking that a 3-grade will be necessary, or that only 2 campuses, would be necessary, it seems counterintuitive to push it off to times in which the costs would be so much more and so much more of a hit on the tax base. So that's just another one of those questions that's really important to think about in terms of the long term. I mean, Dale Street is 70 years old. We have used that building and used it hard, and we will probably continue to use it. We don't just recycle through buildings very quickly around here.
Megan Sullivan, I would like to see number of students per classroom under each of the scenarios with current and variety of projected total enrollments, district-wide numbers. Good suggestion. Chris, Owen, do you mind popping Chris McHugh Potts over, please? And then she'd like to ask a question live. Renee Howley, the debt rolling off the books does not automatically decrease tax responsibility for residents. This is a very important point to consider.
Debt overrides are supposed to be taken off of the books once you pay that debt. Now, the world continues to spin. We have Prop 2.5, so your tax rates will go up by 2.5% pretty much every year anyway. Sometimes there are overrides for other projects. And so you are absolutely right, Renee, in that it does not automatically decrease, but debt is taken off after you are paid, as opposed to an operating override. in which that is left on your tax bill forever, and it becomes your new baseline.
Okay, that was good to clarify. I'll answer Hilly's and then we'll bring Chris over. I would like to, Hilly Pasas, I would like to add that these are also only construction costs, not addressing new busing, staffing, running costs, etc. Yes, Hilly.
Well, actually, no. Can Dr. Farson speak to that? Because we would not staff, we would have to work with the same amount of staff. If we were getting more kids, we're not going to fill a classroom with a staff person if we don't have kids to educate.
Correct. So we would, the student enrollment would drive how much staff we would have. So
Same thing with
if we
busing.
have space, we're not going to try to fill it up with smaller class sizes of, 10 or 11 and add teachers just because we have the space. We wouldn't
Right.
do that.
And the current busing that we have, all of those buses go to all 3 of our elementary schools anyway. So if we were to get an increased population, that would be a cost we would be paying for regardless of whether
Whether it's a new school or not.
new school, whether it's 2 grades, 3 grades, whatever, that's just a cost
Right.
of life. So while it sounds like we would be kind of increasing our costs significantly, in many ways, they could, stay the same because they go with student enrollment, not necessarily with building.
Yes, but I think to Hilly's point, when we look at that chart, those soft costs are not those costs.
Right, but they're just costs that we would have
Correct.
anyway.
Yeah, great. Hilly, again, 50 years, could not think of a more compelling reason to go net zero emission now. Thank you.
And can you imagine the premium that the MSBA might actually offer us? Just saying.
All right, is Chris here? Owen, is Chris over?
Yep.
Oh, great.
Thank you. So I think, I've been, those of you know, I've been to pretty much every one of these Dale Street meetings. I've been to all of the school committee meetings, and there are some phrases that I've heard, one phrase in particular that I've heard quite a bit, and that is to make data-driven decisions. And so I think it's really important to have the data that shows when the debt is rolling off the books, because I know that the Warren Committee brought up the comment that there would be an overlap of debt. And I believe it was Gus who mentioned that for the first few years of the project, of a new project, would overlap with the past projects, and that for these school projects, that the front end debt, the debt is front end loaded. So there would be a significant amount that taxpayers would be paying for the first few years of a new project overlapped with previous projects. But it would be really good to see that information in writing versus believing what I'm saying, because I'm just repeating what people have said at various meetings that I've been at. I also think that it's really important when you're talking about the educational benefits of any grade configuration is to really look at the research that is out there. And I will tell you, I have dug really deep on this. I mean, initially, I focused my argument on, where does grade 3 belong? Does it belong with grade 2, or does it belong with grade 4? And then, all along as I've been at all these various meetings, the thing that kept nagging at me was how big this building was going to be. And at different Dale Street meetings, I heard different members of the committee say out loud, this is going to be a big building. And I didn't pay attention to my gut instinct around the size of the building. And then when I started doing research on a projection of 860 students for grade 3 to 5, the educational benefits from having 500 students in a building to 860 students in the building drops significantly. And there is an abundance of research that shows the smaller the school, the more benefits the children get out of it. And in fact, the research on small school buildings is infinitely stronger than the research on small schools, small class sizes. And I would ask the school committee to look at the exact same research that I looked at, because this was handed to me by a good friend of mine that she has her master's from Harvard in education. She worked at the Gates Foundation. She's now working in education assessment and policy in New York. She's the one who guided me toward this survey. And she said, you need to look at this, because it's really important to see that 500 students in an elementary school is pretty much what it's sort of like I don't know if you want to call it the gold standard. the Newton district actually capped their school buildings at 500 students. And I will say that when you look at the actual projections that we've gotten, they have not played out. And if you look at demographic data across the state, I mean, Wellesley, I think Westwood too, Boston Foundation, they've been doing demographic studies showing that populations are dropping. People are not having the same number of children anymore. People are waiting longer to have children. We've seen our own enrollment declines over a very long period of time. They're dropping. And so why would we build an 860 student school based on overall enrollment projections when we could actually reuse another building? We're just not going to be, I don't believe we're going to be seeing those projections, and the NASDAQ projections have not been playing out. I mean, I went back through 3 years worth of projections that we received, and they're so inaccurate that we can't rely on them. And I know for a fact that our own district leaders went back to MSBA just recently because they don't even believe that the enrollment projections are correct. So I don't know why, for all the reasons between cost, education, the educational benefits are not there for an 860 student school. They're just not. MSBA data shows that it's so uncommon to have an elementary school with 3 grades that is that large. It's just, there's charts out there in MSBA reports that show that. And I just think, I'm looking at this Hanover report that cites student attitudes towards school in general and toward particular school subjects are more positive in small schools. And small schools are defined as less than 500 students. Student social behavior is more positive in small schools. Students in small schools have a greater sense of belonging than in larger ones. Small schools have been linked to more positive teacher attitudes toward their work, and administrators are more positive in small versus larger schools. This is aggregation of multiple research reports. And so I would say that if you're talking about the educational benefits of a grade 3 to 5 configuration that results in 860 students, it's not there. And I have real concerns that the educational excellence that we pride ourselves in Medfield will decline if we proceed with a building with that many students, projected to have that many students. And so I just
All right, thank you, Chris.
Great.
We've gone beyond 3 minutes,
Yeah,
but thank you.
you.
Why don't you forward that research to us, and also if you could send your friend's name if she wants to contact us as well around her research.
Yep.
That would be helpful. You agree, Madam Chair?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you. Thank you, Chris. All right, Renee, sorry, one more. Has there been any consideration in the WheeLock cost model to utilize improved common spaces that already exist versus all new ones? The second gym, for example. Who would like to take that one? Is this a Larry question?
Yeah,
Do you
I was gonna, go ahead, Lynn, or if you want, you could redo the question, because I'm not sure I quite understood it.
Are you saying don't build a second gym in the new school and only use the existing WheeLock gym, or?
I think that might be it, Renee. If that's not the question, if you could just type to say.
And the last anonymous attendee, can you please write your name somewhere? Let's go to Bounce until Renee can clarify. If it is per year, would it be for 30 years? The answer is yes, correct.
Yes, for the term of the debt. Yeah.
30-year bond, okay. And Kate, in the preliminary alternatives chart, it shows a new construction at the Dale Street site being less expensive than a renovation addition. How could that be if demolition to Dale, even in parts, costs so much? Is that a Lynn or a Larry?
Well, the cost for addition renovation has the fact that students will be occupying the school while we're doing the addition renovation. It will have multiple phases in order to accomplish that, and multiple moves of students, which is much more costly. It's a longer construction time frame because of that. So that's why it is more costly to go with an addition renovation versus a new school at Dell, even though after the new school's built, we had planned to take off the later additions of the cafeteria, gym, and those classrooms and library, or, you know, the 1960s edition. Because that, I mean, the cost differential for an ad renovation lasting almost a year longer in construction doesn't offset the $1 million to $2 million price tag of the demolition portions of the Dell Street School.
Yeah, I think, and just to add to that, essentially you've got really three construction projects. There's first the construction of one half of the building, and we've talked about doing the classroom wing first, then moving the kids and getting that piece built and the half of the building renovated, and then moving the kids to that half, and then doing the other construction plus the renovation of that piece. So essentially you've got two projects, and then really there's sort of a third piece to knit it all together. So that's the long range term piece, as opposed to just saying, okay, there's a construction project over there and the contractor can go and build the whole thing in one swat.
There's also a great deal of remediation of toxic substances that would need to happen at Dale Street. Is that correct? So if we were to be doing a kind of an addition renovation while we were trying to have kids and swings there, I mean, it just seems not the best
Logistically difficult.
Yeah.
Well,
And
that site also impacts two schools too.
right.
I mean, that's part of the issue over there.
There's also essentially enabling work that happens so that you essentially split the two parts of the building apart from each other. And that's sort of a preview for then the full construction renovation. Because right now the systems run through the whole building and you need to kind of pull those apart in order that you can then work on half the building while the kids are still in the other half.
Which ends up squeezing us that much more in terms of trying to get, yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Renee clarified her question.
Okay, thanks, Renee. It seems it might help costs if a new school at Wheelock site had shared spaces with current school. Wheelock currently has 2 gyms, for example. Does a new school really need a new gym?
Yes, sure. I think the short answer is,
Say yes.
and the reason for that is, as everybody knows, and we've been working on for a while, we're working within standards that are developed by the MSBA and using those standards, although adjusting them as appropriate for the town of Medfield. But reality is, for the enrollment that we're talking about, it's sort of a gym and a half. In this case, we're creating a large gym so you can have 2 simultaneous sessions going on. If you were to put it next to Wheelock, it would overwhelm the Wheelock gym capacities. And so you really need a separate gyms for the new school.
And to Larry's point, the community was also very interested in having a gym space, so they weren't driving to Wellesley for their kids for basketball and everywhere else. So I think that's an important piece to remember.
And again, a revenue driver, if we should, you know, need to use that. I mean, these are not unappreciable.
Right.
This is not unappreciable income.
Yeah. Claire, for the 345 premium of $10 to $12 million, do the members of the school committee plan to adjust future annual budgets to help offset that cost, even proposing more modest budgets than we have seen in the years past, in the past few years? Will schools see cuts in support for programming because of this premium?
Well, I would say that the school budget and the building are two separate sources of funding. So they wouldn't be together. So it shouldn't impact our budget at all.
So all buildings in town are actually owned by the town. So the building that we're sitting in right now is a town building. And so as such, while we're making educational decisions and keeping our minds open to the financial ramifications, indeed, this is truly a town decision. And the school building committee is a town committee.
So anonymous is Sam McDermott. Using enrollment numbers from 2017 to 2018, a 3-4-5 grade configuration at Wheelock, meaning a campus of grades 1 through 5, increases Wheelock enrollment from 378 to 936, more than doubling its size and rivaling Blake in the high school enrollment of 933 or 993. What specific data has been identified and what specific plans have already been discussed to protect the neighborhoods around Wheelock due to correlating an objectively incredible increase in traffic, parking, after-school activities, etc.?
I don't know if Larry or Lynn could speak to the traffic report, the initial study that we've done so far.
Yeah, I think just to, excuse me, sort of take those one by one. The site at Wheelock is fairly good size. On the west side is the rail line. On the east side is the existing soccer fields. The building as proposed in whatever variation we ultimately end up designing sits sort of behind the building from a standpoint of the building itself, the parking, the activities, we don't see that as having an impact on the neighborhood. As Jeff was mentioning, we are trying to sort out the traffic studies. As everyone can imagine, we were not able to do a realistic traffic study given the situation with COVID-19. So what we have done and carried as sort of an alternate price is the some intersection improvements at Elm and Spring Street in order to improve that intersection if necessary. And what we really want to do is hopefully get some traffic information to tell us whether that intersection really needs that work or not.
There's also the point of every bus in town at this point runs through Wheelock at least
Correct.
twice a day when we have kids in school. So there would not be more buses going unless our population requires that we need to have more buses. And that would happen and be going through that site regardless of whether there was a building there or not. So I think sometimes people feel like, oh, there are 2 schools there, so there are going to be way more buses. And that is actually not true. Every single bus that we have in town goes through Wheelock every day, as well as Dale, as well as Memorial. To be able to actually have one bus service 2 schools in which kids get off, walk out and go to their separate schools from one spot may actually kind of incrementally and tiny help in terms of that flow of traffic so that you don't have one bus coming through, everybody gets thrown off, and then it has to zoom across to the other side of town all the time. So, I mean, it's, you know, there are consequences one way or the other, positive or negative, around busing and things like that. But there would be more teacher traffic there if those people parked every day. There would be probably about the same but less harried parent traffic because you are dropping off more kids in one place and not trying to bust a move across town
and get them there, right?
And get them there on time. So there are, again, there perhaps some unanticipated positives in terms of traffic as opposed to negatives.
And I would say to the parking.
But I don't want to say that your concerns aren't real. They absolutely are. But they may not be as bad as you might think they could be. They could be very much level.
And one of the issues we have at Wheelock right now is parking, just in terms of the parking and after-school activities. If a building is built up there, there's extensive parking that's being added up there, which will hopefully alleviate some of the issues on Elm Street. I know if there's any event at Wheelock now, Elm Street parking is there and all the side roads and everywhere else, but we intend to increase the parking on that spot so there'll be, you know, more cars in the parking lot versus on the street and the traffic on the street.
And I believe all right, Chris McHugh, for the last school construction projects, kids went to school during it, was not a big deal, was short-term inconvenience. Tim, I'm assuming Tim Bonfatti may want to share his perspective in case my memory fails to remember specifics that make last elementary project different from Dale.
Well, I would agree that all our projects, Larry would say, you make it work. Can you hear me?
Okay, now we can.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I don't really remember what happened last time, but I mean, all our projects are built in very tight congested areas. Most all schools are built on their existing campus, so you make it work. There's different mitigation techniques you use and different things that they work, and kids are pretty flexible after they get used to it. And really, it's not, I would never worry about the construction implications. I mean,
Not
phasing,
even on a 70-year-old brick school with 1-foot walls?
phasing is different because you're moving kids themselves are impacted, but if you have a new school and an existing campus, you just find ways to separate them. We're building the Natick Middle School, it's a 1,000-kid middle school, 20 feet away from the existing middle school.
But you're not building it in the building.
No, it's not not a renovation,
Right.
right?
So I think that that's what we're talking about. If we renovate the Dale Street School and we have kids who are in half the building, half the day, or half the building during the day, but the other half is literally
No, that's
renovated and constructed.
much more impactful. I thought Chris was addressing it being built on the same.
Anime, I wanted to kind of, oh, never mind. Go ahead. Thank you.
All righty. Well, thank you, folks. And I think, thank you, Tim, Lynn, Larry. I think we have a lot of contemplating to do.
I'd like to just share
Please.
comments, if it's okay.
Please.
Just the way I look at it, and I know there's different opinions. I've looked at it for a while. Number one priority is make sure we get an improved project. We need an improved project. I appreciate what Chris McHugh said about data-driven decisions. It's everything I do in my career. And you know what I'm hearing, Jeff, from you is a shift. It's the uncertainties of the projections, and there's the uncertainties of getting the town support. And I think it seems that this conversation has gone on for a while. If it was super clear, we need the 3 through 5, we know that, it wouldn't even be a discussion item. And if the town was saying to us consistently throughout, yeah, go 3 to 5, that's fantastic, we would have pretty good clarity that that's not going to be the thing that prevents us from getting support. You know, so I mean, I appreciate what you're saying. We don't know what the town's going to do. We have to make a decision now. I definitely just appreciate that. We may kicking the can down the road, and we may have to pay a little more later. We will have to pay a little more later. But it's not clear to me that I have the town's support. And I don't want to get to next spring and not have a project because we made that decision. That's how I'm looking at it, very simplistically.
I think I see us not making a decision.
The committee has weighed in on it. I've heard opinions that are weighing a certain way. That's where I look at it. Is number one, let's make sure we get the project. When Anime asks for the town's input, we really do want that input, right? If I knew for sure at 3 through 5, the town was fully behind it, I would be saying, great, let's do that. But
I think you overestimate how unified the town is in general, and that conflict and how people kind of make decisions is frequently built on the immediacy of the need. And I think that if we say, well, we just don't have the backing of the town, then we make that a reality that we don't have the backing of the town. But up until this point, we have never said, we believe 3 to 5 is necessary. We believe that it is the best thing for our kids. We've kind of been waiting for this other shoe to fall. There is actually very little. Everybody knows Dale needs to be replaced. But in that argument that you were making about whether the town has the will to do so or not, it's very hard to have the will to build an elementary school, even if the town is if the building is literally falling down in front of your eyes. It's expensive. But I would say that if we were able to come out and say, this is the reason we are doing this, this is why we want to do this, then we would be able to have people follow us. And I do think that this project, and I've said this before, has been kind of failed by a will to do it at all. It's a necessity, but it doesn't feel fun. It kind of feels like, you know, replacing the plumbing in your house instead of taking a vacation, right? Like, it doesn't feel like a great thing. But over 30 years, even $14 million over 30 years, we will regret that $14 million if we think about it as soon as we start paying the debt on it, because we will have other expenses. And I think that I will sit here and kind of argue myself blue around the long-term needs to really look at what Medfield needs, because not doing that has put us in the position we are in now, where we just continue to kick it down the road. Now, do I know, and one commenter said, you know, it just seems to believe that there's that the projections are correct. I don't know. You know, pre-COVID, could they be? Absolutely. Post-COVID, they may be, but perhaps 5 or 6 years later than we thought. But they will still be there. And I will be here 6 years from now, and I will be kicking myself. So I just really think that if our reason is going to be that we just don't think there's a will, then we're not doing our job. Our job is to really understand what the educational purpose would be between a 4-5 and a 3-4-5. And as we say in our own mission statement, being stewards of the funds that the town gives to the school. And I think that we need to have a lot of thought about all the possibilities, not the one that we think might be easiest, because the one that will be easiest will still be very expensive and necessary. Do we go for very expensive and necessary and less, in which we kind of have a drip, drip, drip that does not actually decrease our tax base, it just makes it feel better now? Or do we look ahead and say we need to take some real leadership on this? It is bad, but there are other things this building could do for us in not a very far time horizon. And so I really guess I feel like it's necessary for someone to say these things because they're not popular. I have noticed I'm terribly popular lately anyway, being a member of a school committee in Massachusetts, but they need to be said because we are tired, but sometimes when we're tired, somebody has to tag out and say, yeah, okay, but we have to keep on going. So we will have many more discussions about that, I'm sure.
You know, yeah, I appreciate you're fighting the good fight, and I just need to say it's not fatigue, but it's reality.
No, I understand that. I'm not living in La La Land.
Yeah.
I understand that. But it also needs to be investigated. I mean, I know we can't all of a sudden turn on a dime and say that for pre-COVID, we would have done this, but after that, because we never even determined that.
I disagree.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want to be careful too. I mean, even we are taking leadership. Whatever decision we make, we are taking leadership. There are other factors, not COVID. How much additional effort we churn for people like Jeff, who we are trying to run schools in a very, very difficult time.
Absolutely.
It continues. It's a necessary distraction to build. We have to build.
But once we decide to build, it won't be any more
Trying
of a
to push
distraction.
something that we might not have the level of support that we need. And I think that's at least where I look at it. It does factor into my decision. You know, I'm not, that's where I've been a long time. Number one, make sure we get the project. I've always said right over rush, but I just think it seems reasonable to me. I cannot project what's going to happen in the spring. And I'm looking at it and saying, there's a lot of unknowns. It's just the incremental cost is one thing that's a reasonable for me to look at it. That it's not an easy one. I love the idea of what we've been talking about in 3rd grade. I hate the idea of working this hard and not getting support for the project.
So I would say that to comment on this, I agree with Chris McHugh Potts said around the size of a building. That is not an optimal building size. But unfortunately, Medfield chose to not go with neighborhood schools, and then we grew larger than expected. So in an educational model where we have small elementary schools of 250 to 300 students at an elementary school that they can almost walk to, would actually be the most optimal. So if you really want, to change things to be the most optimal, then we should renovate all 3 elementary schools to accommodate neighborhood schools and start all over again. But I don't think that we can do that because we
For the
put in
record?
a project.
I want to make sure everybody knows Leo said that.
You'll get
Yes,
blanket
I'll
out.
smile through the mask.
No, it's hard. It's hard because I think we try to think as much as we can about our students and the town in which they live and their community. But if we don't have a robust discussion about this in a time of crisis and really investigate whether this is the best decision we can make, then we're not doing our jobs. And so I will sit here and kind of yell about it and brainstorm out loud. And I think you guys will as well. And I appreciate the robustness of the discussion. But I think it should be a hard discussion. There are a lot of things we do our research and we pretty much know where the right outcome comes. And this is a harder one.
Jess,
because it hurts.
I think you're not seeing the silver lining in this. If we do a 4-5 building, then we have the additional 10 to 14 million to put the expansion onto Memorial and redo Wheelock.
Again, that was Leo. And if we're worried about an additional 14, I think we can just sock it on. First of all, you can do an addition for $14 million. And if we can just sock it on Memorial, why wouldn't we sink it into the Dale Street site at Wheelock? If we choose to do that, because we're also jumping ahead.
We might at that point, it's not projections, it's real numbers. We are over capacity. We have no choice. We now need to do modular or we need to add on. It'll be a data-driven decision that we have to spend more. And unfortunately, I think the town would support it. It's like that. That's the way I'm looking at it. Right? It's everything is fair and reasonable, but when we do have to spend more, it's because we know we have more students. And right now, I do understand why the projections are what they are according to Mask a year ago. That's the process we must follow. No question.
I know.
We have to stay with that process.
This is Megan Glenn.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Megan.
No, that's fine.
I love your opinion.
Thank you. I don't want to say that all of this is premature because it's not. This is part of the process. However, our role is to suggest or to approve what we think is best educationally, right? I understand we have to have the backing of the town in order to go forward. We don't know that yet. We don't know if as Anna Mae is saying, we need your input. We need people to come. What are you able to pay in taxes? Is this a deal breaker for you? I want a new school as much as anybody else. I don't want to speak to anyone's wishes if they're not what they want. Does that make sense? I feel like as elected officials, yeah, we're going to make this recommendation. We also need to do it in conjunction with the select board. So it's not solely on us, but I tend to agree with Jess that all of our talk had been 3, 4, 5, and suddenly are the educational benefits different because we're living through a pandemic? I don't know. Are people's living situations different? Absolutely, they are, as Anna Mae is saying. So I'm cognizant of that. I just feel like I need to take a pulse before I can really make a decision either way on which way we go with this. And so, I mean, we can continue to have this robust conversation tonight, but I need to hear from our constituents.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, Megan. I think, we're going to hopefully hear from our constituents, and we can have this discussion on the 27th when we vote and plead our cases. But I think this was a great discussion to have. This is the first time in my recollection where it's been so rich, or as rich. But anyways, I think I want to remind folks, August 27th, please reach out. SC chair there it is on the screen, at email.medfield.net, excuse me. So for grade configuration questions, and then for general Dale Street School Project questions, please email dalestreetschoolproject@gmail.com. I want to thank everybody for their patience and their questions, and the committee for this rich discussion. So we are now going to close this public forum and go on to the next agenda item, which is the draft of the revised 2020-2021 school year calendar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So in your packet, you had a draft
Thank
revision.
you, guys. Sorry.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Could you hear me?
No,
Oh.
I'm just saying thank you to Tim and Lynn and Larry for joining us.
Oh, thanks, everybody. In your materials, you have a draft revised 2020-2021 school year calendar. So as you know, we've at the last meeting, you voted the start of the school year to be September 16th. So we've highlighted in purple the teacher days that go from September 1 to the 15th, and Labor Day is thrown in there on the 7th as well. So that is, a lot of our training and professional development that we're working on prior to the start of our hybrid program. I did take, as you know, we always have 2 teacher professional development days prior to the start of school. So because the state mandated those 10 days, we were allowed to take the days we typically have in our teacher's contract and use them somewhere else. So that's what we put in there. And again, after looking at it, that's why I had mentioned in the narrative to maybe think about this and have a conversation about it at our next meeting. Looking at the days that we placed some of those, like for instance, the Friday before the Columbus Day weekend, that seems really quick, right? So we commit on the 16th, so I'm not sure about that really working for us. One thing you'll notice, we did take away the professional development release days throughout the entire year. We still left the release days that are for conferences or prior to holidays that we've always had in there. But just take a look at it. You'll notice that the last day is June 18th. I've gotten information from the state that we were going to try to eliminate snow days this year coming up. Nothing final in that has been suggested, so that if we were,
Does that make you so happy?
makes me very happy, actually.
Because you can just sleep, man.
It makes me, well, you still have to call the day, but you don't have to
would be a
worry
Zoom
about
day,
transportation. Sorry?
It would be a Zoom day, a remote.
It would be a
learning
remote day, yes.
Yeah.
Which, you look at Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Wisconsin, I think, trying to get another, some parts of
Michigan.
Illinois, they've been doing this forever, right? Because there's so much snowfall there, they've had these remote or, take work home and work from home, we count it as a school day. Massachusetts never done that. So I'm hoping that we go in that direction now. We've had a spring of remote learning, and now we're into a hybrid starting, that we will be able to do something like that. So that's good news where people complain when because we start getting phone calls usually in January. We know when the last day is going to be and that thing. So it'll be easier to plan for folks as well. But that, it definitely impacts what our school year looks like with those 10 additional days in the beginning. And then we have other days sprinkled through. So take a look, and whatever feedback you have, that's great. I'm not sure, like I said, the October one is placed wonderfully. After I asked Andrew to place it there, I looked at it, and when she sent it to me, I'm like, eesh, that's really close. We're just in school, and now we're we're looking at another day. So, so I'd ask you to look at that, and then we'll ask you to vote on that at the 27th.
Okay.
All right.
Great.
But I think the important piece that we had to get out to parents soon was the fact that we were starting on the 16th.
Correct.
And we did get that out. So you folks voted that already, which is great.
Okay.
Now this is just all the other stuff that we got
All right.
to put
So
together.
that's going to be fine tuned and you'll take our feedback.
Right.
Jeff, do we still need all the teacher professional development days throughout the year?
We took them
Those are out.
out.
So we took the half days out, and then we
Oh.
added 2 more full days because those are the 2 days prior to the start of school that we normally use.
I was looking at like March 26th.
So that's always our digital learning.
Oh,
Yeah, so that's built in no matter what. But we added the additional day, one before Martin Luther King Day that weekend, and one before the Columbus Day weekend. Those are the 2 that we added that we typically have prior to the school year.
Do you want to shift the one for Columbus Day, or do you want to keep, I mean, what are your,
I think I would, yeah, I think I
Yeah,
would, but I
let's do it.
would, want your feedback on that.
I think that's a,
I mean, it seems reasonable.
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and if we're gonna, especially if we're doing cohorts,
Right,
like-
I mean, I think, one of the things that we're thinking about when we were first designing this was prior to the 10 days mandate from the state, we were thinking about, well, if we started in hybrid and the numbers are great, maybe we could pivot after that weekend, into full in person or something. That's what we're kind of planning on, but obviously that's, a little bit aggressive right now based on our schedule. So it was there for if we needed to pivot, either more restrictive or less restrictive. But I can certainly look at that and move it somewhere else. And then, but any input you have, shoot me an email if you have input on where you think it should go. And I'll discuss with the teachers union as well.
We keep it as I don't want to call it a flex day, but if we keep it that maybe on the 18th even of June, but if we need to go to that full week, so looking at that last week in June, it's a full week, right?
Right.
So if we keep that day for any kind of preparation that might occur, right, as a spare day that you might need,
right,
for whatever,
right,
maybe just keep it in our back pocket, tack it onto the end of the year, and then if we need it, use it.
Yeah.
It's like Chris said, if you were to pivot, as part of that pivot, you would be coming back to us. You might ask for a day
Right.
prior to.
Which we had to do
Something.
this past year. We had to do that. We moved today in order to give time for teacher planning and that kind of thing. So,
Right.
I mean, that was we were trying to identify where the pivot points might be.
Right.
Looking at October and January, but that might not come up to where it all happens.
Maybe Thanksgiving.
Yeah, hear what the teachers have to say.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that other districts are looking at too is putting those additional days they had prior to the school year into the December 21st, 22nd, 23rd kind of day. So they'd have a full 2 weeks off. So that would get all kids out of the schools, everyone out of the schools, again, clean everything. Again, we don't know what the TARS is going to do. We're just trying to anticipate what that might look like. So that's another idea that, you guys could think about, is putting them there so that there's a full 2 week vacation at that point. So just something to think about.
Is there such a thing as vacation anymore?
Well, you know what I mean.
Is that?
But I think under normal circumstances, we would not have a floater day. It's good to
Correct.
have a set schedule.
Correct.
However, this year, I would imagine that people would understand that if you wanted to have a pause, let's reconsider, or not reconsider, but evaluate. I don't know. I'm talking out loud. In
Yeah, I
terms of
think-
what could be acceptable, and I think this would be acceptable.
Right. I agree.
I mean, I hate to leave you in limbo too. So do you need a vote tonight on this? Or
No.
No, it's 27th.
Okay.
All righty. Any other comments on the calendar? We'll get back to
So if anyone has any ideas, just send me an individual email and we'll
Beautiful.
include that. Thanks.
Great. Any other items since posting?
No, Madam Chair.
Okay. All right, old business, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the vote on the mascot. Before we take our vote, I would like to welcome any statements from any school committee members. We had our public forum. We heard from our students, we heard from alumni, residents, parents, and also Indigenous voices. So perhaps before we go into the vote, I'd love to hear feedback. Megan.
Okay. Yeah, before we take our vote tonight, I just wanted to have a chance to thank everyone that came forward to share their views. As I said in one of our meetings back in June, that the mascot is meant to be representative of our community, all of us. And I'm particularly proud of the way that the forum was run and that it gave everybody an opportunity to put in input, either on a Google form or by speaking at the meeting. Everyone has a right and was given that right to come to the table to have this discussion. What struck me most, I think, was, and paralleled my experience most, was Jean Mignot's kind of confession that she had ridden around town with the warrior mascot on her car. And when I really looked around my house and saw that my kids had sweatshirts and socks and cups and things that had the logo on it, I guess I had never really realized, and I'm now owning up to the fact that I was pretty ignorant of the damage that I was doing using this image. And only after I started kind of doing the heavy lifting of like the researching and the reading and the listening, did I start to understand. And I fully admit that I was in the wrong, and I'm committed to doing and learning and doing better. I also wanted to make clear that the school committee didn't schedule or put this on an agenda at the same time that we're grappling with the reopening. And it just happened that events in this world kind of brought something that had for a long time been percolating behind the scenes in this town to the forefront. And nonetheless, to dismiss the opportunity to have this tough discussion and to re-examine our values because it wasn't convenient and it wasn't a good time was inexcusable. So this was the discussion, this was the time to have it, and this is what we're doing. There are many people that have claimed that the school committee shouldn't have the right to vote this out, and I hope that those residents that felt that way have listened to the meetings, have shared their input, read the information, and researched kind of the legislation that's really out there about to take place. And that something that Brittany said at our forum in terms of this decision kind of being the school committees, and that it is upholding and it's directly in line with our mission statement of promoting citizenship and integrity. I have also talked to my own children and as many residents as I can. And my own teenage son, who will kill me if he sees this, asked me, Mom, I don't see why the town can't just vote on this. Like, why can't they? And I said to him, do you think that voting to keep it would make it right? And he looked at me and he said, oh, I get it. Okay, so this isn't a popularity contest. It's just collectively an acknowledging that our need to move on and the need to do better. And I think that this is the first step in doing that. No one's gonna follow me.
I'm just,
Hi.
thought I'd be quiet for one second.
Oh.
For a minute. I'm waiting for the rest of you to go.
I want to get in before Jess gets in.
Okay, all right.
So,
Next.
I do want to thank everybody who came forward and all the emails and the communication and, even some of the social media feedback and everything else, because it does show the passion and the sense of community that people have in Medfield. But it is obviously something that has been, people have struggled with and trying to bring the subject up. And it is a difficult situation. And even in education communities, we have dealt with plenty of professional development about understanding equity and racism within ourselves and the way we teach and the way we conduct ourselves as educators. And so and even with all that training and all that professional development over years and years, it is still difficult to see through actions and what we perceive in certain ways, because it's ingrained in us from when we're children. And so, and that's who we are as humans. And so it does take a lot of work, as Megan said, to have self-reflection and be able to set the stage for this process, which is going to be one step and one cog in the wheel of continuing to educate ourselves as a learning community. And so, and one of those things is recognizing symbols like this and what they mean to other people besides ourselves. So I do think that we had a very thoughtful process, and Madam Chair for sticking to that process. So thank you for that, and the community for all your feedback. And that's my statement.
Tim, did you have anything to add?
I guess we'll go around the circle. I mean, again, I echo it. Thanks for the feedback from the community, and everyone on this committee for putting together a very, I thought, a fair process, a solid process. That leads me to believe we need to make a decision. The education I received is clear what I think personally I would be voting for. Which I guess by my question is probably pretty clear. The only open item is what happens next. So
Yeah.
if we were to vote to say yes, we want to.
And I'd like to talk about that after our vote, definitely.
Okay.
Yes.
I mean, I'm okay. I think one area is I would just say is we have to continue the dialogue. It's
For
not
sure.
like this decision's made. That's I think what jumps off the page.
Absolutely.
So other than that, thank you for the work that everyone's done to bring this to the forefront.
Great, thank you. Jess, I'll let you go last. All right.
As the designated
As you wrote the
holder of
motion.
the Masters in Social Work and the
Yeah.
guy who gets a lot of this, who ends up taking off.
No, that's all right, because,
I mean, I think we all do.
Yeah.
It's just that, I know I have never been quiet about it. So when I think about this decision, what I actually think about is invisibility and how invisible so many of our children who do not conform to a certain kind of perceived norm, how invisible you have to be to survive in that field. And that's not necessarily the truth, but it's a bit of the myth. And a lot of the discussion I heard was, well, this is honoring Native Americans on the other side, or that this is our heritage. And I think if you were to watch the forum, you would realize that we have other ways to embrace our heritage, our town, our pride in where we live. But the children who are in our schools and the families who are in our towns have a certain, who are of color, I think to some extent live a life that is a little bit invisible to try to live here. That we have not done a great job of embracing culture. And that is part of the longer conversation, right? That is a longer conversation. I think that maybe a little bit of the elephant in the room right now is the expressing of the experiences that young women and men of color have had in Medfield that they talked about today in Hometown Weekly. And that is their experience, and it breaks my heart. And there was a woman on Facebook today who said, this has to have changed in the last 10 years. How could this be so bad now? And a lot of the other questions I've heard is, are there really any Native Americans in Medfield? Is anybody here offended by this? And the answer I could give to that woman, and the answer I can give you today, is that yes. A young woman wrote us who had lived in Medfield and was a Native American and had talked about the logo and tried to open a conversation about it because it did hurt her. It did offend her. She felt as though that conversation went nowhere. And many of the the, and again, it is her experience, it is her lived experience. Many of the Native American voices that we have heard over the last several weeks, this is also their experience. And we spent a lot of time saying, okay, but do you think that now? Okay, but do you think that now? And yes, this warrior, these logos feel damaging. And to some extent, I almost don't feel like this should be a vote. This should be a decision that we could just make, right? Because having the warrior logo does not align with our stated policies around equity, bias, no matter how subtle. And it says it there in the policy, JAE, student policies, removing obstacles to education, no matter how subtle or unintended. So that is what I think that we are doing tonight in the tiniest piece. But the other thing that the school committee is asked to do, tasked with, is to continue to look for opportunities to expand our ideas around bias, inequity, and to promulgate curriculum and efforts that will allow our entire community to do so. And in some ways, the pandemic has offered us many, many, many negatives, but it slowed down the world just enough for us to be able to listen to different voices for a short summer. And it's our job to continue that. And it's our job to keep it on the radar. So tonight, I will make a motion to,
Can I say something? before
yes,
you make
please.
your motion?
Yes, but that's
Yes.
what I think is the point here, is that it doesn't, our job is to make sure that no child feels as though they don't have access to the full range of education because of the experiences they have in school, to the best way that we can control that. And so it becomes a conversation we need to open up to the community and continue to push along. So whatever we do tonight, that's one action, but it is not the action, and it is not even, it is nearly a beginning to what we should do, even in the middle of a pandemic. So yes, please go ahead.
Lovely. I work with an awesome dude, and he once said to me very recently, Anime, you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, meaning listen more, talk less. And I didn't take it as an insult. I really took it to heart that, you know, in this post-George Floyd world where we have been given this gift of reflection, I've committed myself to more self-reflection and to listen and to learn. Because once you learn and connect, you cannot unlearn or disconnect. You know, I must confess, I too thought the mascot was very innocuous. When Jess brought it up 3 years ago, I was like, girlfriend,
It is far less like, oh,
this is not my, you know, I shamefully did not buy into it, you know, but I think, again, it's a gift, it's an opportunity, this moment. The geometric symbol may be less human in form, but it still symbolizes humans, and humans that still very much exist and very much are still suffering. Native Americans are people and not mascots.
we're not mascots. You're right.
So with that, will you read your motion?
All right. I move that the Medfield School Committee votes to permanently discontinue the use of the warrior head logo to represent the Medfield Public Schools in any capacity by a date to be determined in consultation with the superintendent, but not to exceed 1 year from this declaration. In doing so, the Medfield School Committee reaffirms its commitment to support quote, support and stimulate necessary changes to ensure that all obstacles to school programs for all persons, no matter how subtle or unintended, are removed. End quote, policy JA-E of our student policies. Furthermore, the committee would like to extend its gratitude to the members and representatives of the Native American communities and previous Native American Medfield students who generously shared their time, perspective, and experiences as we re-examine this aspect of how we represent the Medfield Public Schools to the larger community.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Leo. We'll take a roll call vote. Jess Riley,
Aye.
Leo Brem,
Aye.
Megan Glenn,
Aye.
Tim Knight.
Aye.
The motion passes.
Now, Tim's question.
Yes.
What comes
For-
next?
For next steps. So I think Dr. Marston, will you send out a memo to staff or how would something like that?
Yeah,
go
absolutely.
out? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, to staff, to stakeholders in
Mhm.
our school community, coaches who are not staff, and PTO members, that would be great. And I think what came out of the forum is Jean Minio did volunteer. However, I would like to, which I'm very grateful for, but I would like to, we received an email from a staff member, and he suggested a task force of some sort with all the stakeholders, and I think it's important not only to comprise of folks who really want to make the change, but call in those people who are a little resistant and bring them into the process.
All right, well, but anyway, we've already made the change around the logo. I think what we need to do is be thinking about, first of all, how we phase out the logo.
Correct.
But also we need to be having a larger conversation, and I think that this is what we had promised and spoken to the community about as well.
Yeah.
A larger conversation about the meaning of the word warrior, if we continue to feel as though that is truly how Medfield should be represented.
And that should be part of the
And that
task
needs to be
force.
part.
Yes.
So I want to be very explicit
Yes.
about that, because that's the forward learning part. And the part about how we define ourselves and whether we can divorce the term warrior enough that it too is not simply reinforcing our previous kind of very specific logo and ideas around.
So I think
I definitely
that-
think it should
So
be a
that's
full
long-term
review.
discussion.
Yes, no,
And
of
that's
how
why I
to roll
really
this
wanted
out.
Jeff to be the person who kind of gives us a timeline, not only for the practicality of the logo, but also how we put together a task force.
Absolutely.
And I think that it shouldn't necessarily be a school committee appointed task force. Simply, so I think that Jeff has a very good idea, the community and the players within it, we can be a part of it.
For sure.
But I think that
And I see this
sometimes
really,
logistically it helps
yeah.
a little bit.
but I think that not only within the schools, but
Mhm.
the community, the greater community, the public, they
Right.
really need to, we have a
Absolutely.
lot of alumni in town who feel very passionate about this.
Right.
And just to bring in people to the process. So we can talk about that, we can have that as an agenda item at the next meeting.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And because I think these next steps are important, and
Absolutely. They're
coming
the most
together
important part of what we're
to,
doing.
what are the values behind a mascot? And I think that'll be a really good.
But I
healing
think it also
process.
fits into, this task force fits into the work we've been doing the last couple of years around equity and
Exactly.
and
yeah.
diversity. So I think it fits in nicely. We already have some things started around that area, so that would be.
Yeah.
good fun.
So, we need to do the planning so that it continues, but I think that this is a good first step.
I think it's a great opportunity for community building too, in
Right.
light of everything else that's going on. This is something that could be a healthy focus as
Absolutely.
opposed to worrying
Healing.
about
Yes.
hybrid.
I would like to go 3 hours without talking about this stupid pandemic. 3 hours.
We were pretty close.
No.
We failed.
Touche. All right, next on the agenda. Thank you very much.
Yes,
Thank you.
Thank you all of you.
School reopening update, Dr. Marsden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In your materials, I just tried to break down some of the next steps that we're doing in the next week or two to move our reopening plan forward. So our plan submitted to DESE, that was done this afternoon. It was due tomorrow. So as I said at our last meeting, the only things we're going to add an executive summary and an FAQ, which we were working on. You folks had approved the plan at the last meeting. We also put in an appendix where it breaks down what the AB cohort looks like, what the C cohort looks like, and what the D cohort looks like. So when we survey families next week, we're going to ask them to refer to that so they get a really good sense of what they're signing up for. So our hybrid model is something that you approved and that we're moving forward with. And we want to get a sense if there are any families that, for a variety of reasons, want to opt out of that hybrid model. So that's what our survey is going to do next week. We also want to survey parents who we're still working with superintendents. We were told today that the state is coming out with recommendations and guidance. Just love that, right? Guidance on how we should approach and whether or not we should have teachers and administrators' children come the 4 days in the hybrid model. And I've gotten some feedback on that since the last meeting. Why can't we do it for nurses and doctors in town? I mean, for the same reason why daycares were open in March and April for essential workers in the medical field, it was a workforce issue. This is a workforce issue for us. So it's not, we're doing something nice for our employees, and all the communities are trying to do that, but it boils down to a workforce issue because people can't come to work because of their kids on different schedules. And this allows us to provide education in Medfield based on the schedule that people have. So that's the core of it, is making sure that we have a workforce, the same reason why the medical folks had that in March and April. So I don't want to, and I felt bad. There were some folks that reached out that are college professors. It's really Massachusetts public school teachers and administrators. That's what we're looking at, who have students in K to 8. We can't even do preschool at this point, just K to 8, because we felt that 9 through 12 isn't as big of an issue as it is with K to 8. So that's where we are. We have a meeting tomorrow afternoon, area superintendents. We're going to try to nail this down and not wait for the state on this because, as we've seen, it just,
Because they'll give us guidance and then say, but you go ahead and do your thing anyway.
that's kind of the way it feels.
Because we already figured out what our thing was.
Yeah.
Dr. Marsden, I have a question
Sure.
regarding those surveys to the parents next week. Will there be any additional information coming out either from you or DESE regarding what the remote learning platform will look like before people are asked about their interests? Because I know that a lot of people are kind of basing their decision on learning more about what it is.
Right. So we have in that back appendix, we explain what it looks like. So it explains what the learning looks like, what the curriculum looks like, what the time commitment looks, all that. We have that in the back, and we have all three models, so that it's a quick reference. You can look at it and you can see side by side. Okay, the instruction and learning for a hybrid is this. For cohort C, it's this. For cohort D, it's that. So that you get a really good sense right there looking at it. We can't have people stay within their cohort A and B and just zoom in or something. We just can't do that. It's not manageable. So people are going to have to make a hard decision. You're going to say, I'm going to be part of the hybrid that the school committee and the superintendent have brought forward, or I'm going to do something else. And it's the same question every parent in every town is getting. So it's not like it's a Medfield only thing. So it may not fit in everyone's schedule. It may not be the best, but we feel like that's what we need to do. And I think districts across the state have to do it in order to manage this. So,
At this point, I've only seen one district that is returning full-time, and it is a district that feeds into a larger high school district. So it's only their K through 5 kids in a very small school, in a very new school.
Western Mass?
No, actually, just north of it.
Oh, North Shore for that one? Yeah, I know that.
Dr. Marsden. It's just calling it, we need this information from you because you're going to live, this is the decision.
Yeah, we'll be very clear with that, absolutely. Yeah, it's a Google form. And as I said at the meeting last week, we do these surveys because it's data that we need to make decisions. So It's information that we need. We may not ask the question you want asked, but that's because we need the information. We're making decisions on it, so we ask very pointed questions that help us guide the decisions that we go forward. So I know I said that last week, but I want to say it again as new ones come out. We design around our needs, so that's what we're doing. The other issues that we're going to be looking at, staffing issues, looking at leaves of absence and remote only requests from teachers. We have some of those that are coming in. We're working with the association on that and working with the individual teachers, and we're taking those on an individual case basis. We're going to let teachers know they have until next Friday, a week from tomorrow, to let me know about that so that we can start making some decisions on where people are going to be at. We're finalizing the first 10 days of training in planning. We've had conversations with the teachers union on that, and Christine and the rest of the leadership team, we've been working on that. We started yesterday finalizing and plugging things in, but we'll continue that work in the next week or two to finalize that. We're going to continue to address the facility needs, working with our vendors. Air quality testing has begun, HVAC work, et cetera, all that was outlined in the plan. And of course, the biggest thing that we're doing right now is continuing to negotiate with the Teachers Association to get some sort of memorandum of agreement on how we're going to start the school year and what that looks like. So that's been taking some time. We're meeting again tomorrow, a couple of sessions next week as well. So that's the reality of Massachusetts and what we have to do. So that's what we're doing.
On Dale Street School project?
So we had our meeting last night. I think both Anime, Leo, as members were there. I know Jess, you were watching because you were talking a little bit about the reception. Wasn't great.
Well, I guess
Anime,
it's
there was a
important.
question that came in about the school reopening plan. Julia.
Yes, Julia. Yes. The answer is yes to that question. I'm not sure she wants me to read it out loud, but yes. So I lost my train of thought. Oh, so we had our meeting last night, going over different schemes, reviewing some of the work that we'll be doing tonight with the form and grade configuration. We had our working group meeting on Monday, which went really well, going through a lot of that. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add, but actually one of the quickest building committee meetings we've had in a long time. It was only an hour and a half, so that was good.
Oh, joy.
But productive, very productive.
Very. I don't think I have
Yeah,
anything else
nothing
to
really.
add. No.
No.
Leo, anything to add? No.
No, I think we covered a lot tonight.
FY21 budget.
Thank you. So one of the things that we had hoped for during the FY21 process is that our Chapter 70, which is state aid money, would be level funded, or at least level funded, maybe more. If you remember, we built our budget in FY21 on a 10% reduction. So part of that 10% reduction was, reducing staff numbers, not hiring folks that we had already hired, new staff, eliminating positions, which we ended up eliminating 11 positions total. So we've got our real numbers from DESI. They came through. Denise Garlick was great, giving us updates as the process went along. So essentially our Chapter 70 money was level funded. So it's $6,288,744. So, from my calculations and Michael's calculations, we're looking at additional funding that should come our way in the tune of about $600,000. So we're not sure the town agrees with that exact number based on our quick conversations, but we need to have more conversations around that and then look at the allocation of that money. But that's really good news for us on several fronts, looking at bringing back, taking that list of cuts that you guys were looking at in May and June and bringing that back up again at the end of August and saying, okay, what do you want to add in? Let's take a look at this again and add some of these in to bring back, which, we certainly need more staffing at this point. That's going to be an important piece. So we hope to have that all nailed down by the 27th in terms of the conversation and what that amount looks like. Michael, I'm sure that's going to be a town meeting issue in the fall. Is that what we talked about?
It has to go to town meeting for a vote.
So it would be I think what happened is that you folks would vote another number based on the increase in Chapter 70, and then that would have to pass through town meeting in the fall, much like it does in the springtime. So there'd be a new budget number. So I'm going to reach out to warrant committee as well and kind of see where they are on all of this too, because we haven't really had that conversation yet. But really good news as far as, planning for the worst at that 10% reduction in getting that level funding, which will really help us out. I also want to let you know too, because I know that we had talked about the SOA money. The commissioner told us this week not to worry about the SOA plan. Deadlines would be extended. You got too much to worry about. That's not going to be an issue. So that was originally, it's been moved like 5 or 6 times. The next time it was going to be moved and due was August 15th. And he told us not to worry about that. So I just want to make sure that you folks know that we don't have to do that right now. Okay. But that's where we are FY21. I hope to have more information on the 27th. And I think it makes sense to resurrect that form from the 27th and start looking at what we can bring back as far as our cuts.
Are you, when you said that you weren't sure that the town agreed with our numbers, are you concerned that some of that reimbursement will be taken to replenish what the town did not fund for their rainy day? I'm sorry, it's 8:30.
No,
I'm losing it at this point.
No, I think that, I know that Anna May had conversations, and Michael and I certainly did too. I know Anna May did with members of the Board of Selectmen. I mean, I think that there was a commitment, as there always been in this community, to make sure that Chapter 70 money goes right to the schools. That's what it's earmarked for. But it doesn't come to us. It goes to the town, and they allocate it to us. So that's why that when the regional school districts, they get it directly. We don't in a town school district. So I think that was always, I think it's just a little, the numbers are a little off from what we have versus what the town has at this point. To the tune of, we think it's around 620,000. They're thinking it's around 570,000, give or take. So we just need to kind of look at that and see where they are. So good news, though. It's good news. It's good news. And then the commissioner met with us on Monday, or was it Tuesday, Monday or Tuesday, and mentioned that they're still waiting on the stimulus package coming from the federal government. So who knows where that's going to be. I did, I wrote a note down. I did want to mention too the metric that was released this week from the state on whether or not, I guess they're calling it now, whether or not kids should go back to school full in time or whatever. Great metric, great data, about 8 weeks too late, quite frankly. So I think it's something that we can certainly use going forward, and we can look at it, and we could set some milestones for us as a school committee, as a school district and a school committee, looking at what the data show on this particular milestone and whether or not we want to change what we're doing. I think it's really good for that, but I think it would have been really awesome to have that as we planned our reentry plan and have that data. We are in an unshaded. I know that DESI is calling it unshaded, DPH is calling it white. So we're going to go the unshaded on that. And that is very low instances of, as of last week, I know, of COVID-19. So that's going to be updated every single Wednesday. So we'll get a new map or a new designation every Wednesday. So we may be, white, green, or whatever. We might go bounce back and forth, or hopefully never get into yellow or red. But that's where we are right now. So a great metric and something that we've been waiting for and asking for in our working group with DESI. Just a little late for our plans.
Now, will that be posted anywhere?
The actual metric?
Yeah, as it's updated.
Yeah, we could. It's posted on DPH website.
And it's also
we can link it to ours though.
COVID-19 kind of website for the town.
Okay.
So,
yeah, it's been distributed quite a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Boston
no,
Globe
it's
did
just
it
helpful.
And but one of the other things, I attended the joint Mass Superintendent Association, as did Megan, and Mass School Committee's Zoom with the commissioner and with the representatives of those two organizations. And one of the things that Commissioner Riley said was that this was essentially supposed to be long-term guidance, and that truly, unless your district was seriously out of whack with that guidance, those districts have been called already and corrected, and we are not one of those districts. And that this was supposed to be like, give it several weeks. Take a look over several weeks and
Mhm.
see where you are in this. Because, honestly, and I feel like I still feel like it's the right course of action, just in that there are so many unknowns with people coming back after vacation, going back to work, bringing
Right.
kids in. And if the governor is retracting and pulling back on the ways that he feels are safe to be outside even with masks, then it's irresponsible of us to not be exceptionally cautious with our children. And so I'm still very comfortable with hybrid. We see how it goes. Maybe we see if 3 feet at some point
Right.
becomes a realistic.
Right.
And we would need, again, at 6 feet seems to be generally accepted. There are, the WHO has said 3, but, I saw a study out of South Korea the other day that said 12 to 17. So, there's a whole lot of kind of what they call preprint research out there because we are all running so fast. And when it comes to our kids, I think caution is a better decision than being incautious. If we have the option, it's hard, but as long as we have a plan and move forward too.
So it'll be a great metric for us going forward. It just is something that in our working group with DESI, we've been asking for. And, certainly the state came through, they listened to us. It just would have been really helpful weeks ago.
Beautiful. All righty.
I have nothing else, Madam Chair.
Okay, sorry.
All
Thank you. All right, our next meeting is August 27th. That's our grade configuration vote. We're going to talk about next steps.
Wait, what, 2 weeks?
No, we'll meet in the middle there somewhere. I would miss you guys if we didn't meet every week.
I have to wait a whole 2 weeks?
Glory be, hallelujah. Anyways.
Madam
Although
Chair.
I was looking at our, I'm sorry, Tim, go ahead.
Just the one thing is, do we want to add an agenda item formally on interim policies during the
Yes.
pandemic for the 27th?
Right, that's
Yes.
great, Tim.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tim.
And
Go ahead.
don't shoot me, but it does seem to me that between the 27th and the 17th is a very long time for us to not meet in September. Yeah, so we'll meet on the 27th, and that's 1, 2, I guess it's only
Well, if something
3
comes up,
weeks.
we'll meet.
But I think,
Right?
as we're kind of looking towards the beginning of the school year, there's always stuff, and the 27th is starting to get pretty crowded. Not that I don't love spending 3 hours.
We don't want to free up Mike and Jess evenings too much.
Yeah.
God forbid.
But also, if it comes down to it, that we should be thinking about a workshop session to be thinking about the general matters of business and school committee stuff that we do in general. Things
Yeah,
that
we've got a
projects
transition
that
and everything else. Yeah.
Yeah, and also projects that we have been working on, we're very invested in terms of communication and kind of procedures. And I would really hate to see that go by the wayside simply because we're just treading water so often. So
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting a date right now. I don't actually want to be that unpopular, but I do think that it might be
Let's put,
helpful
you know what, but
to have
let's,
a working session at some point.
at some point, because I think right now this has been full throttle. So Jess, I appreciate that, but I personally just think we need give us our 2
Oh, yeah.
weeks. Give us our 2 weeks.
No, I'm
These
saying.
guys are 2 weeks and we'll reconvene
Yeah,
and then I think,
workshops can be during the day, they can be,
Yeah.
they don't have to be so.
yeah, but I think in the new year, when we transition, when, we change roles, et cetera, I think then we can, get a date. But I think right now, let's just.
And but with that, I just want to make sure that the trains continue to run.
Yep, I agree. I appreciate that for sure. For sure. For sure. Okay, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, so we'll take a roll call vote. Jess Riley.
Aye.
Leo Brem.
Aye.
Megan Glenn.
Aye.
Tim Knight.
All right.
And Mayo Shea Brook. Aye. Thank you very much. Thank you, folks,
Thanks,
for
everybody.
tuning in.
Thank you, everybody,
Thank you
for
so
tuning
much.
in.
Thank
Appreciate our
you, Owen.
discussions.
Thank you, Matthew.